and they're both going to speak on similar issues, but also different issues. I hope that you will learn something tonight, and I hope you will feel a little bit of compassion for those who are incarcerated and those who are reentering society. So, welcome Christine Bunch and Michelle Jones. And what we'll do is we'll have both of the women give their presentations and hold questions after they're done. And then afterwards, you can introduce yourselves to them if you'd like to talk to them. And there's also going to be refreshments out in the atrium.
Get up here where I can see everybody. I hope you can hear me. I'm just going to give you a brief amount of history because I know a lot of times when you hear wrongful convictions, you don't really know, does that mean they're innocent? Does that mean somebody did something wrong? So in 1995, I was a 21-year-old single mom, and I was working and going to school. And in the early morning hours, my home burnt down, and I lost my 3-year-old child. The police spent about 40 minutes and decided that it was an arson. It couldn't have been anything else. They didn't look for anything else. So they started questioning me, and I was naive. I am from a small town in Indiana, and I'd never been in trouble with the law. And so when they were questioning me, I had no clue that I was being set up as a suspect. Literally, before I knew it, I had been arrested and charged with murder and arson. I was also pregnant with my second child. So I thought, there is absolutely no way that I'm going to be convicted. In this state, you do not have to prove a motive for the crime of murder. In this state, somebody can be convicted on circumstantial evidence. So really, truthfully, the only evidence they had was that I was at that fire and I managed to make it out alive. They looked for other ways to try and convict me, and finally the fire marshals and an ATF chemist falsified test reports to say that there was an accelerant. And so I was found guilty and sentenced to 60 years. I was 6 months pregnant when I walked into the Indiana Women's Prison. I would like to say that, I believed that our justice system would work, that I believed somebody was going to hear my truth, but it's daunting when you walk in there and you realize everybody is looking for some form of justice, whether they committed a crime or whether they didn't, and there's not enough resources to help. I wrote hundreds of letters. I went into school because it was important to me to take advantage of every moment that I was there and make myself better than the person that I came in. Finally, many, many years into my sentence, a local attorney took a look at my case and told me that she believed me, but she didn't know how that we were going to get help. And so I was working in the law library. I had my associate's and bachelor's degree at that time. And I said, I've read about some investigators, and they saved a woman from death row. And I said, when these men walked out and realized that this woman was innocent, they got down on their knees and they thanked God. And I said, so you're going to call them because they're going to help me. And she said, it doesn't work like that. They are the best. And I said, it's going to work like that. You're going to tell them that I'm innocent, and they're going to help. And so the first one said, $300 an hour, that's all we can do. The second one said, we're going to give you 20 hours free. And they started working for me. And then I said, we're going to need more help. So we don't really have an innocence project here in Indiana. So Northwestern University's Center on Wrongful Conviction came over and took on my case. And through a federal subpoena, they found the original report that said it was an accidental fire. There was no accelerant used. And the woman that came on to help us for free proved that it was an electrical fire through new evidence. So literally what that means is my son had died from carbon monoxide before the fire ever broke out. And myself being in the next room, it's a miracle I got up and walked out. So I thought, that's it, I'm gonna go home. I had been in there since 1996. We found this evidence in 2006. I wasn't released until 2012. It is a very long process. We have exonerees that are coming out after 30 and 40 years because our justice system moves so slow. When I walked out, I had a 16-year-old son who was very angry that he didn't have his mom all of his life. I still had people that believed I was guilty, even though I was exonerated. And they let me out of the prison with a pair of white tennis shoes and my prison uniform. That's all I had. I didn't know where I was going to get a toothbrush. I didn't know where I was going to get a change of clothes. I didn't know where I could stay, who I could depend on, where I could take my child. And in that moment, thank the Lord, I had my baby brother who stepped up to take me in so I didn't have to go to a shelter. And in that moment, I realized there's nothing. I hurried up and said, I need to get a job. I have to be able to take care of myself. I have to be able to take care of my child. So I went in for a reentry program. I didn't feel like I needed reentry. I just wanted them to help me with my resume because I now had a 17-year gap. They told me because I no longer had a conviction, I wasn't eligible for that program. So I was like, okay, what am I eligible for? I'm eligible for nothing. It just looks like I took a vacation for 17 years. There's no WIC program, there's no food stamps, there's no housing. All the people that were coming out, they're supposed to have these things, but there was none of that for me. So I pulled myself together and I said, that's fine, I'm gonna go get a job. And luckily, a woman was willing to take a risk on me, even though she couldn't find anything on me for 17 years. And so she gave me a job at a Speedway gas station. So I was supposed to be part-time. I never had under a 40-hour work week. As soon as I got started, she was like, you're wonderful. And 3 weeks after being there, I was an assistant manager. So very quickly, she saw that I was going other places. So at that time, I realized I needed to get away from my brother. I needed to see if I could make it on my own because I was scared. I mean, I had to have a learner's permit to get my driver's license back again. Here I am working, I've got a teenage child, and can I make it on my own? Because when I came out, the dreams I had of going to law school and changing the world, they died very quickly in the face of, I have to get a job, I have to be able to provide a home, I have to take care of my child. That's your first goal. So I moved on my own over to Chicago because Chicago has a tremendous number of exonerees. They also have a lot of programming for people that come out that have been proven innocent. And I wanted to know about that. I wanted to be around other people that could relate to the struggles that I had. So I went over there and I was hired to work at the chaplain's office at Northwestern University. And I worked there full time, and I started working with the Innocence Project. And since then, we have gotten new legislation passed in Wyoming and Illinois. I am working on getting committees and task force formed here, because now that I know all this and have this knowledge, I moved back home to Indiana because I want my state to do the same thing that other states are doing. I want us to have that legislation in place so that when somebody walks out, they aren't walking out and saying the only choice I have is a homeless shelter. They aren't walking out wondering where they're gonna lay their head, get a t-shirt or a toothbrush. So in the face of that, I partnered with another exoneree. My organization, Just Is for Just Us, is literally, the situation just is. We cannot give somebody back that amount of time. We cannot undo everything that has happened. We have to accept what it is in that moment, and we need to bring together a group of us to make it different for them. So our organization is different, whereas we do not help anybody that has a felony. All of our people are people that have been exonerated and proven innocent. So if they hit the National Registry of Exonerees, they are eligible to take part in our programming. We have partnered and found counseling and doctors and dentists in both states. We are allowed through our 501c3 to give them a tax write-off if they donate those services to our men and women as they walk out. We also have church groups that have taken upon themselves to do welcome baskets when these men and women come out, because most of them, after 30 years, their family's gone. Many of them have lost their parents. They literally walk out to no one, and they have no credit score, no renter's history, no education, because not every facility has education, so that these people have the tools they need to reintegrate. So for us, it's a matter of bringing together our community members and showing them how we can make a change and how they can give back in an incredible way. Because I can't describe what it was like the first time I took a bus ride after 17 years, and I was afraid. I didn't know that I would get off at the right place. I didn't know if somebody was gonna come up and hit me from behind. I didn't know, what the people were doing that were pressing up against me. It was uncomfortable. And I had this wonderful little lady that was part of my church community, and she said, I'm gonna take that ride with you. And so every scary thing that I didn't want to do, I had some incredible person say, I'll go with you. And just taking that stigma off of me and making me feel like I was welcome was life-changing for me. And I want every single person that comes out to have that same life-changing experience. We also focus on new legislation, and we work closely with the Innocence Project of New York. The Innocence Project of New York is a separate entity, but all of these innocence projects around the world are under that main organization. So in Wyoming, I went out there and talked about how new evidence was used to bring me home. In Wyoming, they had a 2-year time limit. So if you were arrested and the evidence to exonerate you was scientifically proven 5 years down the road, you would not be able to go back to court. You would be stuck in prison, even though they know you're innocent. But because of the legislation, there's no way to get out. So that was one of the first things we went and did. And I was very intimidated speaking to the legislators. And I got a little mouthy because, of course, one of them said, I don't understand what the urgency is for this. And I sat up and said, well, excuse me, sir, that's probably because you go home every night. And so many of them started chuckling, and he didn't say anything else. But afterwards, he came out and he hugged me. And he said, after this, he said, I'm never going to forget when I walk into my home what somebody else may be waiting for. And he said, I want you to know that. So he took it upon himself to email me as the legislation went through. And as it was passed, he was the one to send me the first email to tell me it was passed and we had changed the law, and now anyone with an innocence claim can come in under new evidence. In Illinois, we partnered the compensation bill with veterans benefits. So now the exonerees coming out are eligible to get health care. They're eligible to get part of the GI Bill and go get a college or vocational education. And for them, it was just literally explaining to them, they haven't been part of a community for 15, 20 years. Everything's changed. They don't know how to use a cell phone. Some of our guys do not know how to turn on a computer. They've never been on the internet. One young lady just got out after 41 years, and she said, I don't know how to drive the car because it's buttons now. We have changed so much, and we have no programming in place for these people. So for us, it's a matter of realizing what the most immediate needs are and letting community members know, if you can donate an hour to us, you can teach somebody how to use a cell phone. You can show somebody how to turn on the computer. And for them, it's life-changing. So we hope to continue to bring more and more groups together. Right now we are in Illinois, Indiana. We are going to get another exoneree hired in Michigan and one in Tennessee. And then we will offer a full-time position to an exoneree from Illinois who will take over our volunteer mentorship program. But from the ground up, it's been me. I learned how to fill out my own 501c3 application. I YouTubed a lot because literally you can find out how to do everything on YouTube. There is a video. So it's eye-opening, it's incredibly overwhelming, and I'm thrilled because I do believe we are making a difference. The sad part is that on both sides of the fence, you have a stigma when you come out. Just because I've been exonerated and these judges have said I'm innocent, I'm still not always treated like that. And that same stigma follows us, even though we've fought and had our day in court and been proven innocent. There's still gonna be people that treat me less than because I was there. There are still gonna be people that act like I am guilty. There are still gonna be rights that I will never have because I'm going to have to go to court to fight. I have to go to court and fight so I can carry a gun. Not that I'm big on carrying a gun, but if I want to do that, I should be able to do it. And so that's something that just on the principle, I'm gonna fight. Because I don't really want a gun, but I don't want you to tell me that I can't. You've already stolen so much from me. So right now, the main focus is to grow our organization, to change as much legislation as we can, bring as many programs to our exonerees, and hopefully save more of them along the way, because we have lost almost a dozen to suicide, because it's just too overwhelming when you get out. So I spend a lot of my time touring, not only talking to legislative groups, but I go to the colleges, because our youth are going to be our next senators, our next congressmen, our next attorneys, our next attorney generals, our state's attorneys, and they are going to be sitting on juries. And I want them to know that we have a fine justice system, but we do not always get it right. We are human, we are infallible, but at the end of the day, we can take that lesson and we can apply it and we can make something tremendous out of it. And so I'm saddened by the 17 years I lost, but I'm very grateful to the person that made me. I'm thankful for where I'm going forward and that I can see changes coming about. I'm delighted that I was invited here to meet all of you, and I look forward to mingling with you afterwards. So thank you.
Giving honor to God, who is my sword and shield. Thank you all for coming today and inviting Chrissy and I to come and talk to you guys. It's really an honor. So I was incarcerated for 20 years, and when I reflect on the conditions that incarcerated people, especially women, are living with, the forced silences, the maligned characters, the lingering illnesses, the controlled access to information, and women being sentenced to slow deaths, I know that it is a darkness that is deeply alienating. Oftentimes, we have no idea what's happening on the outside world for people who are fighting and working to make change for us as incarcerated women inside. So I want to talk to you a little bit about that. When a person leaves prison, we tend to think that their sentence is over, that their debt to society is paid, but when in fact it's quite the opposite. Michelle Alexander stated in The New Jim Crow that today, a criminal freed from prison has scarcely more rights and arguably less respect than a freed slave or a black person living free in Mississippi at the height of Jim Crow. So across the nation, the post-incarcerated contend with debilitating consequences of criminal convictions. So the American Bar Association in 2015 established a website that had a listing of 48,000 laws that they discovered that blocked or hindered a formerly incarcerated person's access to opportunity. If securing employment is crucial to reducing recidivism, the awareness that has finally been drawn to how incapacitating collateral consequences are to reentry has only recently come to the fore. It had become apparent that many barriers to full citizenship that the newly released experience were not easily identifiable. They were in different statutes. They were a part of different codes. They were a part of different regulations. They weren't centrally located. So this website organized that information. So I recently participated in a project, it was my research project at Harvard, where I sought to account for the specific categories in which, in Indiana, there are 800 laws, nearly 800 laws. And I wanted to know what categories they fell into. I wanted to look deeply at what exactly was being barred. What couldn't people getting out of prison, what couldn't they not do? I wanted to situate collateral consequences squarely under a social framework opposed to a legal one. The second purpose was to suggest laws that needed to be amended, removed because the penalties no longer make sense, or because they were like archaic holdovers. Another purpose was to move the dialogue about collateral consequences from criminology and criminal lawyer communities that have a tendency to publish and write just for each other, to share it amongst communities, organizers who are not invested in keeping the criminal justice system so robust and thriving. Lastly, it's important for me to suggest new legislation that requires prosecutors and judges to consider collateral consequences as a part of the sentencing process. New legislation that requires attorneys to inform their clients of all the consequences that accompany pleading guilty, especially for the youth who are sometimes offered deferred adjudication. They need to know that if they fail to hold up to those responsibilities, they will face a whole battery of collateral consequences. So I believe this is a worthy goal, because to galvanize Indiana state legislators and the criminal legal system to be at the forefront of creating a state that, as our governor, now Vice President Mike Pence said, is the worst state in which to commit a crime, but the best state for a second chance. This can't happen without a thorough reintegration of the post-incarcerated to citizenship. So, what are collateral consequences? Collateral consequences include, but are not limited to, the ineligibility for certain employment, occupational licenses such as nurses, lawyers, plumbers, bartenders, and massage therapists. Collateral consequences can include the ineligibility to receive public housing, government contracts, pension benefits, welfare benefits. In most states, it includes the right to vote, the right to hold office or a public trust, the opportunity to be a public service volunteer or to sit on a jury. Collateral consequences can result in the loss of parental rights, the right to travel freely, to live in certain parts of town, or to live with other family members who happen to be on probation or parole. They may also result in deportation. Post-incarcerated people often do not qualify also for bonded positions such as insurance agents, bail bondsmen, private detectives, and even bonded commercial janitorial positions. And of course, we know that they're not allowed to carry a firearm. So collateral consequences are applied across the board and are not considered on a case-by-case basis. So imagine an 18-year-old high school student who's convicted of having consensual sex with a 16-year-old. That 18-year-old will be required to register as a sex offender for the rest of their life. A convicted pedophile would undergo the same treatment. Additionally, there are literally so many collateral consequences, many of them severe, that affect so many people. They're very hard to mitigate. And it's particularly with social media and the easy access to background checks that you could just download on the website, on the internet. So in my project, there was, like I said, there's 790 laws on the books in the state of Indiana that bar or hinder access to opportunity for the formerly incarcerated. 450 of them were directly related to employment. 291 affect occupational and professional licensure and certification. And 209 relate to business ownership and property rights. So many positions that are in the professional, contractor, educator, business owner capacity. So millions of people and thousands in this state, especially people of color, are relegated by these collateral consequences to the bottom financial rungs of society in the service and or informal economy sectors. Basically, their upward mobility is stunted, legally stunted. If this is a clear assault on class mobility for the formerly incarcerated in the pathways to earning a living wage, let alone financial stability, a lot of that is literally locked out. And overwhelmingly, the multitude of the employment laws that I found were in the healthcare field, nearly a quarter. So why can't the formerly incarcerated or previously arrested enter into fields in which they're called to care and serve for their fellow man? It actually contradicts the so-called reform ideology purported as the purpose of jails and prisons in the first place, where you're supposed to take the captive, they're supposed to learn or relearn how to care and serve and not harm each other, and therefore be called rehabilitated. The fact that many of the Indiana collateral consequences don't have time limits for their duration and their permanence would also suggest that the state has no real belief in rehabilitation. If it did, the afterlife of incarceration wouldn't continue with the criminalization and the penalties, some of them harsh, lasting up from 6 months to 30 years. Therefore, collateral consequences brings into question the notion that prisons serve a legitimate rehabilitative purpose in the law for the evildoers. As Angela Davis said about prisons, I also say about the criminalization of the justice involved. The prison functions into which undesirables are deposited, relieving us of the responsibility of thinking about the real issues afflicting those communities from which they are drawn from such disproportionate numbers. I'm suggesting that there's nothing about the relevance or the pervasiveness of collateral consequences that is arbitrary. It's quite intentional. So the bottom line is, the post-incarcerated experience the automatic reduction of full citizenship upon release, which leaves them prey to unlimited discrimination, social destigmatization, and it actually facilitates recidivism. For the post-incarcerated who are not normal and are othered, we are judged at every turn, in every circumstance, and in every petition by those inside and outside the corrections framework. Further, because the carceral state, and that's when I talk about the carceral state, I'm talking about the overall umbrella apparatus that includes all of these moving mechanisms, right? Because the carceral state ascribes normative value, the post-incarcerated then are hyper-surveilled, tested, and judged in such a way that their bodies, though we are free from physical incarceration, are nevertheless captured. Collateral consequences of criminal convictions are at the heart of why the completion of a sentence, the completion of your sentence, does not equal freedom. It actually equals a state of unfreedom. And I'm going to tell you why that is. I believe it's because of social consequences. So, think about your everyday social interactions with people. How those interactions are tainted or changed based on the knowledge of a person's criminal background and history. Growing out of the stigma of arrest and or conviction of an offense and extending beyond the legal collateral consequences, social consequences are most insidious because they help perpetuate. They're part of the longevity of a post-incarcerated outcast status. While not the focus of most legal scholars, and they don't pay much attention to this, social consequences permeate all facets of our life. Where we live, they're in the microcosm of everyday life. Let me give you an example. I have a friend who was incarcerated for many years. She got out. She was interested. She worked with dogs for a little while when she was inside. She was a very broken woman. So she thought, I'll go get me a dog. Because I worked with dogs when I was inside. I'll go get me a dog, and maybe we can help each other. So she goes to a pet rescue, a rescue shelter for dogs, instead of going to, some hoity-toity place buying a dog. And she thinks, I'll get a dog that nobody wanted, and me and this dog can do it together. She chooses a dog. She goes up to the front, begins to fill out paperwork. She's excited. She's got her dog. The dog loves her. She loves the dog. She's filling out the paperwork, and she has to check the box. This woman who worked training other people, training dogs to serve other handicapped people, couldn't even get a dog for her own self because she had to check the box. She had to deal with the collateral consequences of a criminal conviction. And there's no law on the books. This is coming out of her social interactions with the world. So what can that cause? Social destabilization is directly linked to a person's formerly incarcerated status. It is marked by the codes, the local policies and regulations that discriminate through their arbitrary application that is often hidden within the fabric of social interactions in public institutions. What does the social destabilization look like? It looks like the formerly incarcerated people are more likely to experience homelessness, community exclusion, family destabilization, stigmatized children, cosmic employment exclusion, higher education exclusion. Their social networks are fragmented. They deal with unending criminal justice debt, emotional dysfunction, mental illness, and low self-esteem. Social destabilization is racialized, as the population most likely to experience it as a result of incarceration are Black and brown. So consider the findings of the Ferguson investigation, wherein policing practices that fostered indebtedness via criminal justice debt for people in that municipality, they were overwhelmingly Black and brown. Social destabilization has also been proven to result in shortened lifespans. So how do we counter unfreedom? Because as I've talked about today, structural formations of racism, classism, gendered capitalism, and criminality, they work against freedom for the formerly incarcerated. So our reclaiming our citizenship, it's pocketed. And in some places, in some situations, completely revoked. So how are we to deal with those challenges today? I suggest that we start where we are with what we have and do what we can. And two, Do it working in relationship with the people you're trying to help. This is important. The tentacled nature of the carceral state and its many agents work hard to keep the formerly incarcerated othered and socially exiled. I know a woman who began to volunteer her time at a book service that sent in books to incarcerated people in. I love this group. They sent me so many books over the years. I was so blessed by this group. So she had known no one in her life who had ever been incarcerated, and she herself had never been incarcerated. So she decided to help one of her friends who worked there. Okay, so the woman starts so she starts working there. Women and men all over the country start sending in these requests about their reading interests. The woman had never believed herself to be particularly prejudiced or biased towards incarcerated people, but she found herself amazed by the varied reading interests of people behind bars. She just never thought they would be interested in books that she herself liked. It is unfortunate, but the othering of people who have criminal records, who have been incarcerated, who have that history, is so easy to do. It's easy to forget that incarcerated people and people who've been in prison are just people. So moving into the future and all your different advocacies, all the different things that you're interested in, I would hope that you remember this. It is important for all of us, particularly all of us in our church community, because the people in our church community, we believe in redemption. We believe in forgiveness. We believe in new lives in Christ. We believe in that. And so when we stand on that, it means that we have to come out of our spaces of comfort and safety, talk to people we don't know, be willing to step in front of situations we don't know, give in places we've never given before, and step out on that faith, step out on that belief that we say we hold dear. One way to stay grounded in this worth is to give your time and energy to working with directly impacted people and their families who suffer just as much or more from their family members being incarcerated. In other words, keep the flesh and the bones on the work that you're doing or the interests that you're in, and bring what you have. I recently attended an event where a representative from the Mellon Foundation told a story of mass incarceration. And he had his numbers, and he did percentages, and he talked about money spent and saved on the body of the incarcerated people who have access to opportunity. His point was to share his support for higher education in prison. Yet the most compelling advocate for higher education was the young man who came up after him, who told the story about him graduating from college while incarcerated. He then called up all the other formerly incarcerated guys, and they stood up there and they stood strong because they had all earned their associate's degrees together. Their smiles, the hugs, the mutual respect, it was so present. And I ask you, which moment would have moved you? In other words, keep the flesh. Keep building relationship. Because I would not be here today without God first. His forgiveness and the forgiveness I finally got to for myself. Also, I wouldn't be here without Dr. Kelsey Kaufman and Dr. Nicole Siegel. These two were very accomplished academic women in the university. They did no new jail campaigns. They fought lethal injections. But they were also willing to come into the prison and get directly involved with incarcerated people. I am who I am, and I bring to any table a certain skill set and capacity. But it would have been squandered with access to opportunity. And that is what Dr. Kaufman and Dr. Siegel brought to the Indiana Women's Prison, access to opportunity. Now, it wasn't easy. Departments of Corrections bring all sorts of challenges to volunteers coming into prisons, and they add to the ways in which the incarcerated people are victimized and criminalized. But there are thousands of people who fight against those odds. So the only way for the formerly incarcerated to be reintegrated really into society is through relationship. And you heard Chrissy talk about that. The only way we counter social destabilization is through building connections. We have to dispel the notion that those who've been in prison are just criminals. We have to communicate and demonstrate with our bodies that crime is not causal. When you consider crime, you need to consider that there's an individual, and outside of them is the family relations, and outside of them is the social and economic and community relationships, and outside of that is the structures of racism, sexism, classism, capitalism, the carceral state, and empire, all working at the same time to create the world that the individual experiences. I'm not saying that everyone should not take responsibility for the things in which they do in this world. I mean, they absolutely should. I'm saying that when you see a person violating social, legal norms, cultural norms, there's more going on with that individual than just the violation of social, cultural, and legal norms. So I encourage you all to think about ways in which you look at the news, you see how massive this apparatus of the carceral state is, you see how the criminal justice system is failing in reform, and you know that there's work to be done. One of the ways that we can counter that and deal with it directly, I lost myself. One of the ways we can deal with that directly is to work with directly impacted people and their families on the ground. We can build relationships. In order to build relationships, people must have access to opportunity. All of you are opportunity creators. Cease to use the word criminal as the standard by which you measure a person who's been involved in the criminal justice system. We are people. We are people who have failed ourselves and you and society as a whole. But we're still people. And this is not just for the non-incarcerated. I'm also talking to formerly incarcerated people too, right? Because they can't just sit back and wait for others to solve their problems with reintegration. So we know what's happening amongst us. And we have to make efforts to change it, just as Chrissy has already demonstrated. In my own life, I have found organizations that help formerly incarcerated women, and I support them with my money, my time, my talent, and my treasure. So we all, collectively as a community, have to figure out how we can enter into these issues and counter unfreedom. The notion that those persons who end up incarcerated and formerly incarcerated and living every day in the carceral state, the notion that we need to stay broken for the system to run is a truth that all of us have to reckon with. Is a truth that they try to convince us that we need to stay this way, right? The corrections industry is the third largest employer in the state, in the nation. Think of all the hundreds and thousands of people who need the carceral state to stay robust to pay their bills. We gotta ask ourselves, what kind of system needs people to stay broken in order for other people to have a job? And only you can answer that in your own time. And we need to counter that idea with the very fiber of our being. The boundaries to civil rights, self-sufficiency, and sustainability must be crossed. When those on the fringes of society do better, meaning they have access to opportunity and resources, we all are better. So that is essentially what I came to talk to you guys about. But in my spirit, because I'm a believer, I really believe in the heart of me that it will require all of us, people who have never come in connection with the criminal justice system, but people who agree that incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people are people, who deserve an opportunity to build self-sufficient and sustainable lives. That requires all of us, not just those who are directly impacted. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle and Christine. And I just wanted to let you know that I've known Christine for 22 years and Michelle for 20 years, and I am very proud and honored to call them my friends. Now we'll be open for questions. Does anybody have a question for either Michelle or Christine? Really? No questions? Yes. Do you want me to bring this back there?
Hi, Joe Lichty. Thanks to both of you. One thing's, Michelle, you talked about how you regard this proliferation of disadvantages that accumulate as in no way accidental. And one of the points I'd be interested in thinking about that, what's your take, or is there a standard rationale when one of these many laws gets passed? What's the logic? What's the stated logic? Even just to start with the stated logic, whatever may be underlying things, how are they rationalized?
So why don't I go with an example? So in the mid-1990s, the Clinton administration began to purport and push a sort of tough on crime narrative that the Reagan administration started. And so he mimicked that in order to stay elected. And in Indiana's a very conservative state, and so they don't move immediately when other states make big changes to laws. And so on our books, one of the key laws that changed nationally was the termination of parental rights law. So in the state of Indiana, a woman can lose her child permanently, adopted out, if the child is in the system. Am I okay? That when my hair is in the way. When a child is in the system, 18 or 22 months at a time, 18 when it was first passed, legislators watched to see what was happening in other states, and they passed a similar law. But it was directly in response to a punitive turn that happened in the 90s. And it became a wave, and the state of Indiana just followed along. Other states had passed similar laws, and the state of Indiana did as well. And in fact, it's also become an issue for re-election. This idea of let us prove ourselves more tougher on crime than the other group. I'm more tougher on crime than the other group. The law has actually been dropped now to 15 months. So a woman could go to prison for just 3 years, 3 to 5 years, and lose her children forever. Permanent termination of parental rights, not temporary, permanent. And it comes out of this whole idea, riding out of the war on drugs, riding the Clinton administration wave, and that's how many of these laws get passed. Indiana watches the other states a lot of times and sees how laws are being implemented, and they will use them as arguing points for re-election. And we end up in systems where people are choosing to fight for certain aspects, certain issues, fighting for the issues that end up with more punitive livelihoods, more punitive lives for those who are incarcerated or formerly incarcerated. And it's very devastating. You should see the rush. Marie and I used to work in the law library. The rush to sometimes to get a parental guardianship established quickly. The need to try to get their children out of the system before the time ticked away. Well, everyone doesn't have a place for their children to go. So what's wrong with their children going somewhere temporarily, then they come home and they get their children back? Well, a lot of people are still fighting that. right? They're fighting to get their children back, and after they've spent a temporary time in prison. So that's one example.
Yes.
Do you have any information as to an estimate of how many people are wrongfully convicted and imprisoned in the state of Indiana?
So right now on the National Registry of Exonerees, Indiana has 42 exonerees. I can tell you that our Innocence Project that is located at IUPUI at McKinney Law School has one full-time staff attorney, and she's also a full-time teacher. Because of their semester systems, she only has students for so many weeks, so the students are ineligible to help with that program. She doesn't have an advisory board or extra people to help. In addition to that, when Northwestern took my case and I walked out, they started investigating 5 other women that I was incarcerated with that they feel like are innocent. And 5 is all they were able to take. We now have other groups. Notre Dame has just started their own exoneration project, and Centurion Ministries, who primarily handles death penalty cases, have now branched out, and they are looking at cases in Indiana. And they believe we have many here that are untapped and haven't been investigated.
Valerie Gross, 2 related questions. One is, as an exoneree, are you obligated to check that box that says you were once incarcerated and you couldn't adopt a dog?
I do not have to check the box.
Good to know. The second question has to do with that box. California just passed a law that you can no longer, as an employer, have that box on your employment application. Do you happen to know if other states are following suit, or were they the first, or have others started to follow suit?
Yeah, absolutely. So the move to remove the box is often a grassroots movement. For example, NYU's students filed a complaint with the president of NYU, and they started a coalition, the NYU Education Coalition, and they fought to get the box removed from the application. And honestly, that is the reason why I didn't have to check a box at NYU, because it had been cleared and they had fought for it, and it had been approved. So at the U.S. Department of Education, they have come out and offered a best practices toolkit that's available online for employers and institutions to follow suit. The U.S. Department of Education, in terms of higher education, has decided that this is actually hindering people towards graduate education, higher education, and finishing that process. So they've actually come out, published best practices, encouraging other universities to do it. But again, it's a choice. It's an individual choice. It's pocketed. Each individual place of business, school, healthcare agency, everyone is doing their own thing. And so, and even in the state level, right? It's extremely pocketed, and the state laws have so many areas that are discretionary with choosing a criminal to deal with a criminal background check, and then also ones that are extremely permanent. And so that list that is available on the website by the National Council of State Governments, I know it's NC, I can give that to you later. It actually lists every law and whether it is a discretionary or a mandatory enforcement. And it's based on the field of employment. So those are all available for online for people to look at. But again, people can choose to do things. People can choose to make their own decisions, like NYU chose to make their own decision to change their own policies. And that's basically, but they wouldn't have done it without a grassroots movement. They wouldn't have done it without individuals saying that we believe this is wrong, we're going to fight for this. And that's what I'm talking about when we're talking about individuals getting involved when and where they enter.
I'm Dwight Grieser. A couple weeks ago, there was on Channel 16, there was a short investigative report about the number of children in the state of Indiana who are foster children. Based on your answer to Joe Lichty, I'm wondering if there's a correlation between that number they gave, 16,100 foster children, no homes in the state of Indiana, versus 328 in Michigan.
Go ahead.
That's my story. That is my story. I was a child that was a foster child. And the pathway for children who are in the system to also end up in the prison is very high. And you'll learn tomorrow about the pipeline to prison from school to prison pipeline, right? It's even more so for children who are in foster care, who have either been abandoned by their parents or abused by their parents or suffered some trauma that is not being cared for in the Chin system. I'm a child from the Chin system. And the number of those kids who actually do not successfully matriculate out of the Marion County Child Welfare Department is extremely high. So many of them have a bump through juvenile because they're angry and they're mad and they're abandoned and they're not receiving the care. They're being sort of warehoused pre-prison in these places that are not dealing with the stuff that they're not dealing. I'm telling you, I did a Rorschach test, and they didn't deal with any of the issues that caused me to be a child in need of services. It's a really big issue. And my case manager, bless her heart, she had 60 kids. No caseworker could provide care adequately to 60 kids. But that's the load that they give them. That's the work that's on them. And I saw my caseworker once every 6 months when she would pick me up and take me to juvenile so that Judge Payne could say, are you in school? Check. Are you doing this? Check. Are you doing that? Check. Okay. See you in 6 months. And that kind of lack of care for a traumatized child, obviously, if I'm a child in need of services, something happened. Something happened at home. Somebody removed me from that house. Something went down. But they're so busy trying, the child welfare system, you have no idea. You have no idea. And honestly, they are doing the best they can, but they have extremely limited resources for these kids. And a lot of them take a side trip to prison, either once they matriculate out at 18 or sometime during that group home, warehoused community experience. It's a sad truth, but it's a truth.
Could you talk a little bit more about the expenses that some people continue to acquire as they get out for the service that they have to pay for? Or maybe they even come out of prison with it. I don't know. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Do you want to talk about criminal justice or do you want me to talk about criminal justice? You talk about criminal justice.
Okay, so when you come out, we've had to fight for many of our exonerees, people that have been proven innocent, that should not have been behind bars, and they are being sued for back child support after you stole 35 years of their life. So they owe 18 years worth of child support, and because the state gave that mother some help, they expect them to pay it back. Then the big issue was, I know many of you have probably seen headlines where a wrongfully convicted person sued and was given this huge amount of money. That is less than 1% of all exonerees. It is a 50-50 shot when you go up against them at a lawsuit, and literally the odds are stacked against you because they don't want you to win any money against them. They don't even want to admit that they were wrong to have you in prison in the first place. So when those people come out and they win those, you might see they won $15 million. What you don't know is up until last year, they were having to pay taxes on that money. So the government was snatching back as much as they could. Their lawyers took almost half of it. And when they came out, they had to take loans because some of these people were wrongfully convicted at 14, 15, 16. And so they came out, they had no education. There was no way to get a job. There's no way to reintegrate them so that in 6 months to a year, they can take care of themselves. So because they had these lawsuits pending, they hope that they're going to win, and people will step up and give them loans with astronomical amounts of interest tacked on. And so then if these people don't win, they now have that debt hanging over them. They tend to do the same thing with people that come out on the other side of the fence, because you're going to have to pay, if there's a victim, you have to pay a certain amount for victims' rights. And so that gets allocated to the state. Everything that comes in for your parole and probation fees, that gets allocated back to the states, which is supposed to set you up with everything you need to reintegrate. Education, reentry programs, housing, food stamps, Because of our legislation, more than half of those people are not eligible for those programs. If you have a drug offense, you are not eligible for those programs. So those people are paying out money for programming they're never going to have access to. And it's just a never-ending cycle, because if you don't pay that money back, then they can come back and arrest you and take you back to prison.
And I'll just add, criminal justice debt may not be an issue in some states as it is in Indiana and New York and California. But you can receive criminal justice debt for, like she said, probation and parole, restitution, being on any kind of surveillance, and all of these things, and adding on the victimization fees, the assessment fees. You would be surprised. The Indiana traffic fees for failing to pay those fines are starting to mirror California. In California, if you fail to pay a $100 ticket, well, first of all, the moment you get the ticket, they're assessing all of these things on you. So the ticket that was once $100, by the time it's due, it's $481. And then the first time you miss a payment on the $481, you're assessed a $300 late fee. And there's 2 other smaller fines total. But the research is showing that fines and fees in the criminal justice system is being used as revenue to bulk up this system, to keep the system running. And the Ferguson, Missouri report was one of the first ones to highlight that they actually had testimony from judges and staffers inside the state government saying to the cops that you need to get more tickets, you need to give more tickets, you need to arrest more people, because can't you bump your revenue up to 10% this year? I mean, it was actually a thought plan to extract, hyper-surveil, lay in wait, and entrap certain people so they could extract fines and fees from them. That system is happening everywhere. And in my current research, I did a current paper about criminal justice debt. It is one thing that is actually helping to facilitate recidivism, right? To reincarceration. Because as Chrissy said, people get reincarcerated for failure to pay a civil fine. And in Indiana, if you come back because you did not pay a civil fine, you go back under your criminal charge. So now, what is civil is criminal once you get back into the system. That's right now. That's happening right now.
Michelle, I know a little bit about you because I know Marie. I'd like to know a little bit about your personal story of how you decided to do research when you were incarcerated and somehow got access to the records of the Indiana State Museum. You look back into the 19th century of some of these institutions. I can't think that that's a very good atmosphere to become a writer, but you speak like a writer. Very well, I might say. So tell us a little bit about your story of how you started to get interested in research and writing and how that led to your current opportunity in New York.
Okay, sure. Thank you. So I got my bachelor's degree inside, as Chrissy, you finished your bachelor's degree inside, right? Inside Ball State. It was 2004. I thought, oh gosh, this is it. We're done, no more education. Let me get my, there we go. And then I got a chance to take a 4-year seminary program. Did you take that, Marie? Yeah, we both got our seminary degrees at Swanee Theological, which was cool. So I was like, okay, another 4 years, yay, 2008. I've always been a person interested in learning. And then I went to work for Oakland City University, was a registrar, worked with Marie and worked with Chrissy. And then Oakland City left because the funding was removed for all higher education programs in the state of Indiana. The bottom dropped out, and we were like, we don't know what we're gonna do with a prison that doesn't have higher education in it, because our culture in the prison was built around higher education. These women, education was a prized thing, and so the culture was going to be different, and we were worried about that. Well, anyway, 2013, Dr. Kelsey Kaufman comes in, and she offers a non-credit courses using volunteer faculty from DePaul and IU and other volunteer faculty that are currently working in different places to come and offer real classes to the women for $0. And they put up GoFundMes to pay for their books and supplies, and they basically funded their own individual classes. So this went on. We were very excited, and then she got this half-brain idea that we were going to write the history of the prison that we were in, and we were like, please, okay, whatever. She's like, yeah, we're going to write this book. It's like, nobody believes you, but she actually had some postdocs go to the Indiana archives and actually digitize the registry of the first 15 years of the prison. She also made a concerted effort by going to the Indiana Archives, the Indiana Historical Society, the Indiana Public Library, the Indiana State Library, and the Indiana Women's Prison itself, and began to retrieve all those primary resources. She brought them into the prison. She thought we would write the book in a semester, and and then she also broke us up into groups. And some people took architecture, some people took economics, some people took the women, some people took the girls. And we began to read all these primary resources and start reading all these secondary resources to kind of help give us contextual grounding. So it's great, fabulous. At the end of the semester, we weren't done. And at the end of the second semester, we weren't done. But we began to, in the research, to find some very amazing findings, right? Some things that had not been written in the accounts that we had of these benevolent Quaker reformers. We learned things that we didn't know, that no one had written about. And so we began to present those findings at conferences. And our very first conference was the Indiana Historical Association. And we gave our presentation via Skype to an amazing audience of 6. And it was fabulous. But after that, it seemed to be, people began to think, oh, they might be onto something. So different faculty members started sending us in books, and other librarians began to volunteer time to go look for stuff for us, because we would come up with huge resource list questions like, we don't know this, we don't know this, we don't know this. And their hard work, because now that I'm doing my own archival research, I praise them, because it is hard work. Sitting and pulling out these things, and you don't know what you're going to find, and you've got the gloves on, and it stinks, they're moldy, the books, it's just, I didn't know what I was getting into, so I was really grateful for the people who our librarians who did all that background work for us. So anyway, basically, we began to publish our findings. We began to present at conferences. And today, we have a new press book contract. And there are 7 women, 2 outside, 5 inside, who are going to write the book about the new Indiana history that we're writing, about the women's prison history. And it all started by a lady coming in there saying, we're going to write a book in a semester. Yeah, right, whatever. Well, now it's 2018 and we're going to write a book. So, yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions for Michelle and Christine?
David Maldonado. I don't have a question. I just want to share a little about getting involved. When we were pastoring Attica, I was part of prison fellowship. So we did that for 3 years with a team. During that time, a gentleman, or Aida Fuentes, made contact with me. She said, Ismael Torres has completed his 12 years for killing someone because he got drunk, got in an argument, got mad, decided he's going to kill him. So that's what he did. So Ismael Torres was about 59 when he came to us. He had nowhere to go because he was from Puerto Rico, but he didn't have his family nor his children. So she says, David, can you take him in? I says, well, I don't know. Where am I going to put him? We were raising 5 children, our 3 children and 2 other kids, my nephew and my niece. So I couldn't fit them with us. So anyways, I said, okay, the church has a few properties. I'm going to put them in one. Next week, I'll tell the board. And that's what I did. So I put Ismael Ortiz, he's 59 years old, give or take, in one of the houses. And then the following week, I told the board, hey, there's a ex-con. He's all right. He's already done his killing. We're all right. Time went on. What we did for Ismael was bring him home to have breakfast with us. He's now in our home eating breakfast with children. He's getting to know that environment again. He's feeling, like you said, human. He's having coffee. He's eating breakfast with people who are not in jail. So slowly he starts to share with us his dream. He would like to have a lawnscape company. Madeline does the paperwork for him, starts a corporation, gets the city license, everything you got to do to start a business. He was able to buy a pickup truck. It was a little Toyota pickup truck. Some brothers came together. They bought him a little lawnmower, a weed eater, got him started. So he hauled that around for about a year. Then he bought a trailer. Then he bought a ride-on mower. And he just kept buying little things. Before you knew it, he had about 80 clients or customers. But not just that, then he starts pressure washing. He starts doing painting. Then he got married. Then he got a house. Then he visited Puerto Rico, where he hadn't been there in over 45 years. Then he made contact with his children. So here you have one person. Oh, and then he became part of our homeless ministry, and he was the cook for all the homeless folks that would come on Sundays. Getting involved, it was easy. I realized that it was easy to go to the prison and preach for an hour. Then I left. And I could say in front of everybody, hey, we went to the prison. But then it got real one day. We had a prisoner or an ex-con living among us. But the community got together, the church community. At first, I know we were all scared, you know. But years later, about 15, 16 years later, he passed away. But at least his last 16 years, were quote unquote normal. So I just wanted to share that with you.
This may be a mundane and unrelated question, but for 18 years here at College Mennonite Church, we've been involved in the Angel Tree Ministry, in which the incarcerated parents would indicate what kind of gifts they would like to give to their children if they could. Well, it has been our practice that we would send Christmas cards and birthday cards to these incarcerated parents. Now, about, I think, a year ago, we've been told no more cards, but use lined paper. So we now use lined paper to send messages. And then, just a couple months ago, I learned that no more photographs unless they're on lined paper. Now, I want to know what is so marvelous about lined paper.
Just say, I appreciate you so much. This is my current beef of all beefs. I have written state legislators about this, as well as other people who work for the city, and I encourage you guys to do this as well. Okay, so the reason why no one can send a birthday card or a Christmas card or a congratulations card, or the reason why no one can get letters from businesses anymore on official letterhead, is because these people are concerned about drugs on paper and cards. Now here's the thing. There's a machine that could be purchased that would scan for that. Major, larger prisons have them. This is not anything that would break the bank. But instead of buying the equipment so that you can scan and look for your drugs, you would rather cripple social networks of communication with incarcerated people. You would rather stop a woman from receiving the latest picture of her newborn that she had to leave with somebody because she has to do more time in prison. You would rather her go without pictures of her children, me go without pictures of my spirit family, my spirit mom, and you would rather that than to handle your security issue. I would encourage you guys to do exactly what I'm doing, is going off to state legislators saying that this makes no sense, because if there's equipment to buy so that you can do your safety and security, why punish the people who are not breaking any rules? Why punish everybody? But this is currently what is happening. So the pictures on lined notebook paper requires printing, but printing on laser printers are forbidden. So exactly how are we going to get pictures on lined notebook paper? Again, it is the insanity of people who would rather avoid handling a process that requires some money. It's the knee-jerk way that which the Department of Correction does in order to do less. If we just tell them no, just tell them no, but they spend so much time sending all the mail back. They spend so much time filling out confiscation papers, because every piece of mail that is sent to us, because this is federal, has to have a form that says, we sent it back because it was bad. So they're creating more work for themselves out of the idea that they're trying to do less work instead of purchasing the equipment so that they can perform safety and security. I get it. Guys, gals, whoever. They were first putting the Suboxone on the stamp. So for years they would rip off our return stamp. Great, fine, chicken, great. But this whole move to take away the pictures is a real violation, you guys, when you think about women and men, women who can no longer get those updated photos of their kids. They've got to look at them on the screen on the JPEG and not have them with them in their beds anymore. If you go into some of those women's cells, you will see pictures of their family plastered up if they're on the bottom bunk on their thing or on their wall. Our families, our community connections are important to us. But so you say that I can't have these pictures that are literally my network, my connection, my prayer, my hope, my wish, to avoid doing something so simple, which is buy the right equipment. You guys all know your state legislators' names by heart. I know y'all do. You should argue, you should go off about this, because it's such a violation. If you think about it, we got everybody's pictures on our phone. Everybody's pictures on our phone. We have photo albums. We got pictures on the microwave. We've got pictures on the refrigerator. We've got them on the mantle. What if you had none of that? It's such a violation to take away our pictures. And I say our because I know what those women are going through. My pictures were everything. So, yes, it is insane, but it's also a tool in which to do less.
I just have to tell you, thank you so much, because it warmed my heart. Giving birth inside is the hardest thing ever. You get less than 48 hours with your child, and then they're taken out. And I was blessed. My mom was disabled, and my younger brother quit school at 17 and started working 3 jobs. And he took care of my mom and my newborn, and he made sure my baby was there every week. And so Trent has different perceptions of things. And when he would get those angel tree gifts that never said it came from Angel Tree, it always said, "Merry Christmas, Mom." And so then he would ask me why Dana Blank, our superintendent, would let me go out shopping and not let him go with. And so the little special things like that were so meaningful because you reached out and gave him something that I wished with all my heart that I could have. And the pictures that would come in of him opening things up, I mean, the pictures are so important. Every week, we were only allowed 50 pictures. And so my baby is changing every single time I see him. So I'm taking pictures, and my family are sending them in. So each week, it was a matter of, I'm going to send this 25 home, and I'm going to try to hide 10 over here in some old letters, and I have another 25 here that's going to come in. And it was a constant rotation, but they kept me fighting. They kept me going. And those gifts were so precious, and they meant the world.
Relatedly, to do with you've mentioned certain pieces of legislation. I've been following a little bit the Dignity for Incarcerated Women Act and one about women being allowed to keep their babies for up to 3 years. Do you have a clearinghouse or a go-to website for where to find out what to advocate, what we should be calling legislators about? And similarly with volunteer opportunities, like you mentioned Angel Tree, like, do you have go-to places for those, or is it always a Google search kind of thing?
Okay, so Cut 50, hashtag Cut 50 are the people behind the First Step Act. And part of the First Step Act is the Dignity for Incarcerated Women Act. Everyone knows what that is, right? The Dignity for Incarcerated Women Act is an act that is fighting to have the women no longer be shackled while they're giving birth. Immediately thereafter. Currently in the state of Indiana, there's a chain that's around the wrist, around the ankle while a woman is giving birth. And so, and across the nation, it's kind of a common practice. And so the Dignity for Incarcerated Women Act is to fight for that, as well as a few other things. You can look that up online. But also the First Step Act. Now, the First Step Act has several preliminary prison reform policies. Now, I feel like the First Step Act is not strong enough, but that's my personal opinion. However, it is gaining bipartisan support, and sometimes we have to take what we can get in the moment while we fight for the next thing down the road. We can't wait for, utopia and then go, oh, we vote for that. So I'm in support of the First Step Act. That is also available on the hashtag cut50.com, that website. And Cut 50 is predominantly, was heavily supported and led by Van Jones. And check it out, take a look at it, see what you think about it. There's a place where you can sign up to support it as organizations or as individuals. Look at all of it, read it, all of it, think what really scrutinize it for yourself and see if it's something you can get behind, because it's some of the early efforts of bipartisan criminal justice reform that's happening in this particular administration.
Your Innocence Project website, and any of them will tell you legislative issues that are coming up concerning not just innocent individuals, but across the board, because they are coming in and saying, we need taped interrogations, we need evidence preservation, which is something we do not have in this state. So if you don't know to ask for your stuff to be saved, it could be thrown away and you never get an opportunity in court. So you can click on by each state and it will let you know what's coming up. With the Dignity for Women, there's also a documentary out called Survivor's Guide to Prison, and it's been touring. And so David Arquette and Matthew Cook took that upon themselves to do that. And it gives you a very graphic idea of what it's like inside, not only for the innocent, because there are some innocent that have taken part in that documentary, but also for the people that are guilty. And it could be as simple as an officer tells you, hey, I want to talk to you, and you don't want a confrontation, and you turn around and walk away, and they have you arrested for resisting. So it tells you what our nation is going through every single day, because the amount of people in New York and Los Angeles in this country, they are being arrested every single day across the country. That huge amount of people. And we don't realize that. We don't recognize that this system is that big and we need that many arrests to sustain it. And it's only going to keep growing if we don't go forward. But on their website and social media, they're talking about new legislation that's coming forth, because several of the women in the facilities are rising up because they don't have sanitary napkins. They don't have toilet paper. They don't have basic human needs. So this is a growing movement, and so I encourage you all to get on there and check those out and see how you can become involved.
Yeah, and I just would add the sentencingproject.org. The sentencingproject.org is being led by one of the more prolific fighters for criminal justice reform, and every week he sends out a weekly update of what's happening across the nation in terms of those policies. So it's like a nice center hub to find out what's going on across the country in one snapshot. And that's the sentencingproject.org.
Just a quick, this is not a question, just a quick, there's so much bad news in the world, and there is, every time I read about or go inside behind bars, I find so much depressing. You all have been such a breath of fresh air, and I leave hopeful. To hear your stories and what you're doing is just a real gift, so thank you.
Thank you both so much. And there is an opportunity for visiting in the, what do you call it, the atrium? Is that the proper word? The atrium, the West Atrium, after our gathering here. And so there'll be more chances to visit with Christina Michelle. I find, just a quick thought, because I'm a preacher and I can't help myself. This morning in this space we heard, those of us who were here heard Vincent Harding talk about occupying the thirst, referring to hunger and thirsting for righteousness. So when you find yourself being agitated, when you find yourself hungering and thirsting after our evening, this evening like this, lean into it, not away from it. Thank you for coming.